I don't work nights anymore, but for years I worked the night shift in a residential care facility. On weekends, I was the only person in charge of a dementia facility. It was sometimes spooky, consisting of 15 residents and only me to keep an eye on them all throughout the night. Around 3 a.m. in the morning, after doing an intentional round where I checked on all the residents and they were safe and well, I heard the doorbell ring. I got a sudden wave of goosebumps because this was a secure facility and it was the middle of the night. I went and looked out of the window, but there was nobody there. I blew it off as being a hallucination because I was exhausted most of the nights. About 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang again, so I went back to the window and checked again. Nobody was there, but I looked across the street and a strange car was parked there. I took a photo of it just in case, and then I went back to my station where I had been playing a game of cards with a delightful but very demented lady. I sat down and she looked at me and said, "What did the gentleman want, dearie?" Chills went down my spine, but I brushed it off because hallucinations are common with dementia, and this lady is particularly prone to not being oriented to time and place. However, the doorbell rang again less than 5 minutes later, and this time I was getting scared. Another one of my residents was awake and walking in the hallway, painting with a clean paintbrush to keep him occupied. I passed him on the way to the front window, and he turned to me and said, "Don't answer the door alone, he might hurt you," before continuing to pretend to paint. I looked out of the window to see the same car as before, and as I was looking around, I saw a shadow moving in front of the door. A person walked around the corner and then looked straight into the window next to me. We made direct eye contact, and it was essentially a jump scare for me, so I was startled and screamed. My residents started freaking out, and the guy on the other side of the door ran away. I called the police and they showed up shortly after. It was straight chaos at that point, because I had 15 residents who all had been woken by the commotion, and 2 police officers in the building now also. Eventually, with the help of the 2 kind officers, I was able to get everybody settled down, but it took a while. I eventually learned from the cops that there was a woman down the road whose house was broken into. She was attacked in bed by someone who ransacked her house looking for drugs. I can't help but wonder if it was the same person from earlier that night intentionally trying to get into my facility for the drugs that are kept there. I'm grateful that our whole facility was so secure, and apparently the culprit just took the next best option. A strange part of the story that I'll never understand is how 2 of my patients knew that there was a man out there who wanted to enter and potentially hurt me. They were never close enough to the door to look out of the window and see anyone. It feels like one of those eerie guardian angel moments, or just a strange coincidence. I left that job not long after because they refused to hire a second person to work the nights, despite being understaffed according to best practice guidelines. I worked at a water treatment plant on the graveyard shift. The place was isolated, situated next to a highway that connected 2 cities about an hour apart. Nothing but some empty fields and trees were in between. It would just be me there during the night shift. My job and why I had to be there was to check the levels, adjust equipment every now and then, and basically just make sure that everything was working and it wasn't going to blow up. During my shift, I would be inside an 8-foot-tall barbed wire fence which was locked, but the access door to the rest of the facility were always open. One night at about 2:30 or 3 a.m., I was sitting in my control room area killing time on my Nintendo DS. The sound of the game was the only thing breaking the silence, and I was halfway zoning out when I heard a voice from behind me. The voice shouted out to get on the ground. I turned around and saw a guy standing there behind me holding a gun. He must have climbed the barbed wire fence to get to me, because I could see he was bleeding from several locations on his body. I must have been taking a while to comprehend what was happening, because the man yelled to get on the ground again. I didn't hesitate this time, and I dropped to my knees. He kept the gun pointed at me as he stepped closer. I remember that he kept apologizing to me, saying that he was sorry, but he had to do this. I thought that maybe he had been hired to kill me by someone, and what could I have possibly done to deserve this? He began asking for my truck keys, my wallet, and my phone. I didn't argue, and I handed everything over. Next, he tied me up. He used some duct tape that was near my desk, wrapping it around my wrists and my ankles. I still had no idea if I was going to die soon, or maybe I was being kidnapped and that's why he was tying me up. After a few minutes, the guy backed away. He apologized again, and then he turned and walked out of the room. I heard the sound of my truck starting up, and then the tires crunching the gravel as he drove away. For a moment, I just sat there, totally in shock, trying to calm myself down. The duct tape wrapped around my wrists and ankles wasn't the greatest, and I was able to free myself after a while. I used the emergency phone at the water treatment facility and called the police, and they said they would send someone right away. When the cops came, they asked me a bunch of questions, wrote down everything I could remember, and arranged for a way home for me. The next day, I found out the guy was arrested in the town over. He'd apparently escaped from an inmate custody transport a few days before, and had been on the run ever since. The police said he was desperate, probably running out of options, and that he had likely walked a long way to get to the water plant. That made sense, considering how far in the middle of nowhere the plant was. I even got all my stuff back besides the cash in my wallet, because he had been caught trying to pawn off my stuff in the next town over. I think about that night often, and have had to go to some therapy for it. The man was obviously desperate, and maybe he had thought about killing me, since it would likely have given him more time to escape, as the cops would have been called much later. There have been some other strange occurrences that happened while I was working the night shift job, but this one was easily the scariest thing that I ever experienced there. Many years ago, I used to work a night shift at a hotel in South Carolina. During the summer season, it wasn't so bad, mostly families. We had on-site security during the summer also. However, the winter months were different. The cheap weekly rates we'd offer attracted a lot of creepy people. The idea was to make money in the off-season by renting to what is known as snowbirds, older retired people who come to the beach for a month or so through the winter. It did not always work out that way, though. The cheap rates made it possible for less than desirable people to become long-term residents. I've discovered more than my fair share of meth labs, broken up physical assaults, and more during the winter months. Working the night shift, I would meet some interesting people. I have a lot of stories from the night shift, but this one is the one that stands out because it did not end well for me. I began working at midnight and hung out with my friend Andrew. Andrew worked late-night maintenance shifts at this hotel and 2 other hotels that our company owned. He would regularly stop by after work and go grab us some food, and we'd hang out and talk since business was so slow. We had just ordered food, and he was getting ready to leave and go pick it up. I was just walking into the office to grab some money from my wallet to give it to Andrew when I heard the doorbell indicating a customer had entered. I had just come back and reached the doorway back to the lobby area when I saw Andrew just fall down in front of me. Next thing I knew, a guy walked around the corner and punched me in the head with a short steel pipe in his hand. It staggered me and I went on one knee. He hit me in the head with the pipe, and the only thing I remember was his partner saying that Andrew got away and found a cop, so they had to go now. I was finally able to get to my feet from the blow I received. I tried to call the police from the phone in the back office, but it was having issues. I slammed it in frustration. I was hurt, scared, and really freaking out. I realized they could come back, so I ran to lock the door. I don't know where Andrew had gone, and that worried me. I finally got the phone to work, and I told the 911 operator that I had been attacked, and I needed an officer and an ambulance. I didn't unlock the front door until the cops and ambulance pulled up. It was at this time, after I found out they punched and knocked him down, that Andrew had been able to amazingly jump over the desk and escape. He luckily ran outside as a cop was driving by, which he ran to flag down for help. I ended up in the hospital ER where I had to have 10 staples in my head, and they gave me morphine for pain. I thought I had only been hit in the head once after being punched, but I was later shown the video from the hotel cameras, and the video showed a different story. After I went to one knee, the guy hit me not just one time, but 10 total times. I kept trying to grab the pipe and get up for some reason. I do not remember any of this happening. He kept punching me and hitting me with the pipe until his accomplice told me that Andrew got away and flagged down a cop. We never found out why they chose to attack me. The police thought it might be a failed robbery attempt due to Andrew getting away and me not just going down. The only other explanation I could think of was someone was getting revenge on me for one of the many incidents I had to deal with while working the night shift. For example, maybe someone was getting back at me for a physical assault that I broke up in a room, or the meth labs I had discovered. Once I recovered, I came back to work the night shift for a bit, but I had PTSD and was very nervous it might happen again, so I ended up finding a different job. They never caught the guys who did it as far as I know. I used to work night shifts at this large manufacturing facility. The night shift consisted of a very small crew, including 5 security workers and 5 of us doing administration and packing. As administration staff, I sat with security as they'd switch between patrolling and monitoring the cameras. It was usually silent and boring. One night near Halloween, I was halfway into my shift on my lunch hour break. It was chilly, and I went to my car to grab my bigger jacket and have a smoke break. I was right outside the back door where this fence is closest to the building. It's maybe 10 yards off the back door. The only light was motion activated, and I had to keep making grand arm movements to keep it on. It's all grass and shadows up to the fence, and the light doesn't really hit that far. I was watching videos on my phone, and the light went out from a lack of motion. I sat in the dark a bit, sipping my coffee and finishing my cigarette. As I was finishing, I reached up and waved to activate the light to find the ashtray, but as the light flickered on, I heard a noise on the fence across from me. We do get some animals out there, and they could get startled, but as I stood up, I heard the fence keep slightly jiggling. When I looked up, I didn't see much. The light didn't really illuminate much outside its circle on the ground. My first thought was to say hello, which I did in a questioning tone. When I spoke, the sound stopped for a moment. I squinted into the darkness trying to adjust, but it was hard with the light on. However, once the light turned off again, the light from the moon had a little bit more effect lighting up the area. The fence started jiggling again. As my eyes adjusted better, I saw movement. It looked like a person opposite me at the fence fidgeting with the links. I thought this must be a kid just trying to spook us. Maybe they were going to break in and explore, which some kids had done before without knowing the building never closed. But it wasn't common, and this was one person, alone. I was worried, so I radioed to desk security with my walkie-talkie. I informed security that we had a visitor outside the fence on the north end of the building. I've seen the monitors of camera feed, and I know this area is totally covered by cameras. They would be able to check the fence clearly. My walkie beeped back, and the security guy said, "We aren't reading any movement at the fence. Is it in the tree line?" I responded back no, and they were fiddling with the fence right in front of me. The next events all happened so fast. Security didn't even have the chance to reply to me when from the fence, I heard this massively louder thrash of the lynx, and all I saw was a figure full-on sprinting at me. I spilled my coffee all over as I rushed back inside the building. I pushed myself inside and held the knob in place, trying to keep the deadbolt in place. The knob was flicking down hard against my hold. I could hear and feel something moving against the opposite side of the door. By the time security got down to me, I had the deadbolt in place, and the knob of the door was still now. I didn't understand why the security workers weren't taking me seriously while I explained the story, until I saw the playback from the cameras. It was just me outside. There was nothing there. I immediately thought this was a big prank on me, but everyone else genuinely thought that I was the one fooling them. Upon watching the footage a second time more closely, however, we noticed the way the door handle kept moving even when I removed my hand from it. Both the inside camera and outside caught it. We also noticed right before I panicked and turned to run inside, the fence made a slight jolt as if it was pushed. There were no holes in the fence or any kind of cuts made where somebody could squeeze through. There were no creepy shadows or unexplained wisps of smoke or light or movement besides those. Nobody there wanted to admit anything happened to me. Everyone came up with logical explanations like it was tricks of the moonlight, an overactive imagination, or too much coffee. I didn't want to argue about it. They already thought that I was being weird about it. I went about finishing my shift, but nobody used the back door again that night, and it remained locked. The longest employed security employee was finishing up his shift at the desk with me in the office that night. A few minutes before clocking out, he cleared his throat and told me, "I never really liked that north end. It feels like someone's eyes are always on me." It's honestly the most he's ever said to me in the years plus I worked there, the most I ever heard him say. I felt like the statement held even more weight from that alone. I worked there another 7 months and never had another incident. I never actually went out there again though. I stopped smoking, took my breaks out in the lobby, or wasted time chatting with coworkers. I made any excuse not to go out by that door again. I've never before or since had any moments where I felt like my imagination got the better of me, and I truly believe that wasn't the case here. I keep thinking back to that door handle jerking down when I was not touching it anymore. That had to be proof I wasn't imagining the whole thing. I worked overnight at a Subway inside a 24-hour truck stop, which wasn't the most glamorous job, but it kept the bills paid. Most of the time, it was quiet, especially after the regular truckers had eaten and left for the night. I was behind the counter one night, cleaning up some stuff, when this guy came in. He was just standing there staring at the menu, and then he asked me if I had a sandwich for him. At first, I thought he might have called in an order or something, so I asked him his name to look it up. That's when he stepped forward a bit, and I saw that he was covered in blood, soaked through his shirt, splattered his jeans, and dripping onto the floor. It was dark in the store, and I didn't realize how bad it was until I saw the red. It wasn't a little bit either. He was really covered in it. I froze for a second, and then he told me that I didn't need to know his name and to just make him a sandwich. I didn't want the guy to panic, so I tried to stay calm and think of the best way to notify someone. While making his sandwich, I thought of an excuse to go to the back of the store, saying that I needed to get more lettuce since the bin was almost done. I signaled to my other coworker who was relaxing in the back before her shift started to go get the off-duty state trooper who worked security around that time. A few minutes later, I saw the trooper finally coming into the store as I was finishing up with the man's sandwich. The trooper saw the trail of blood on the floor and the guy's stare, and it was obvious that something was seriously wrong. He must have had years of experience with things like this, because he moved in slow and steady, pretending he was just there for a sandwich, and got close. But the second he got close, the guy tensed up like he was about to bolt. The trooper stepped forward and grabbed him as the guy tried to pull away, but the trooper was faster. The man covered in blood was arrested and then questioned. The guy had been stabbed, but he didn't even know how bad it was because he was in shock. Apparently, he'd stabbed someone to death earlier that night, and the shock he had made him so disoriented he didn't even realize how badly he was bleeding. He'd been driving around, gassing up his car at the pump just a few feet away, and getting food to go on the run. He was just some guy who walked in wanting a sandwich, acting like it was no big deal while covered in blood after a murder. It was a chilling experience for me having to deal with something like that while working a night shift job.